10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You have entered Untold Radio AM. And now broadcasting from a secret location, your hosts, Joel Sturgis and Doug Hychak.
Hey, welcome to Untold Radio. How you doing, Alex?
Great. Excited to be here.
Yeah, okay. So Joel isn't here, and that's because he's got some kind of scheduling conflict today. He gave me plenty of warning, and so you're here, which is awesome. And so if anybody doesn't know, Alex is my second oldest son, not the oldest.
No.
You're working on it, though. Oh, my God. Anyhow, so this is our first live YouTube simulcast. And I would imagine we're going to do this every Wednesday, right, Alex?
Agreed. Yeah.
Except with Joel. You won't have to do it.
Exactly.
Unless Joel's sick, or hopefully you can keep filling in for him. But so we've got a great guest tonight, Peter Robbins, who has just been kind of an idol of mine. Some people know about Peter, and a lot of people who are in the UFO community big time, of course they do. But if they don't, if they're not really into the UFO community, they may not know who he is. But he is one of the most intellectual, brilliant men that I'm aware of. I mean, the guy's amazing. He's done more for the UFO community than you could comprehend. His bio is a mile long. So at 7:30, we're going to bring Peter on. And
Exactly.
we'll talk about everything from alien abductions to just the whole UFO mystery and where it's going. So, but anyhow, I've got a whole bunch of show notes tonight because there was a bunch of stuff I wanted to talk about. But the first thing that happened, I got up this morning and there's a fresh pot of coffee and a fresh baked pan of cookies right out of the oven. So I get up and I'm thinking, if I eat one of those damn things, I'm never going to, I'm not going to eat breakfast. Probably I'll keep eating them through lunch. That's exactly what I did. So I ate sweets all day. So I'm really sugared up. So
Oh, no.
I'm super sugared up. So if I do crash, if you see me in a coma over here, it's to wake me up. But right now I feel good. But I ate the whole pan except for like 6 cookies. Swear to God.
Whole pan.
It's the dumbest thing I ever did. Yeah. It's just like I'm a little kid. I don't know how you are about sweets, but if somebody puts them in front of you and they're fresh and they're delicious, you're just going to eat them. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I can't have any of it in the house. Otherwise, it's gone.
Yeah. And
Get that from you.
sweets make you fall asleep, as I remember.
Yeah. Pretty much food makes me fall asleep.
Food does? Oh, man. So anyhow, okay. So I've got show notes. And I'm gonna confess what happened. What was it, yesterday?
Yesterday.
We were actually just testing out the new format and screwing around. And I moved my big studio computer too far forward, and it fell off a big ledge, crashed to the desk into the ground, glass shattered, and I lost, of course, my amazing computer. I mean, this was I don't know, I bought it maybe 5 years ago, and it's one of those supercomputers where I had to sign forms and government forms that say you can't resell it or anything. So I'm really sad. So anyhow, I lost my computer. So that.
Yeah. And I don't know if I had told you this, but it froze right before it hit.
That was bad. And my heart just sank when I thought, oh, so what? We don't care if the glass is cracked, big deal. But I went to hit the on button, and it wouldn't boot up. And I'm like, ugh. So maybe Blaine can still revive it somehow. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Because it was one of those all-in-one computers.
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool, but apparently he's getting me a new one. Okay, have you ever heard of the word super ionic? Super ionic. I just discovered this word yesterday.
I'm not even going to pretend to understand that word.
Okay. Super ionic. Apparently, they discovered a new material that fills the Earth's core, and they now think it's a super ionic material, which means it's a super ionic state. I'll read what I've got here if I can maneuver with my crappy little computer here in my notes. So apparently, a guy named Yu He, a physicist at the Chinese Academy of Science, and the lead author of a study published this month in the Journal of Nature, said the calculations challenged what researchers once understood about the inner core of Earth. Okay. So he and his colleagues found the inner core creates a super ionic state, and it's made up of hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And apparently it's unlike anything else they've ever discovered. So it's not a solid and it's not a liquid. Super ionic. So there you go.
Interesting.
The word of the day. I usually like to throw some new word or something. And I found that really interesting, but I'm thinking, do they really know? They have never drilled that far down, ever.
Yeah, it's weird.
And if they could, wouldn't it be cool if they could drill down to where they could discover some new endless energy source where there's some type of cold fusion going on, or God knows what? We don't know.
Yeah, they're clueless.
Yeah. When I was 6, I tried to drill to the core of the Earth. When I was 6 years old.
How far did you get?
Not very far, probably about 4 feet, with a plastic shovel. And then one time we were at the beach, and we decided we're going to try it at the beach because it's softer, the sand. And we started digging right at the base of an outhouse. Do you understand what happened? When we finally got in about 3 or 4 feet, we had like 20 kids, we're all digging because we're trying to get to the core of the Earth. All of a sudden we hit the core, but it wasn't the Earth. We hit
it's the core of something.
It was bad. I still have bad memories about that. Anyhow. Okay. So this mouse is really awkward the way I've got this set up. So hopefully we get my new computer next week. So another thing I was reading about Kennedy. John F. Kennedy and Lincoln, the coincidence. I just ran into it. I don't know if it was on TikTok or who knows, but it was really interesting. All these coincidences. So I'm going to read the weird coincidences between John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln. And the one at the end, you got to wait for the one at the end because the one at the end is really hilarious, but apparently it's true, but it's funny. It's definitely a drum roll one. Okay. So apparently Lincoln's name 7 letters, Kennedy 7 letters, big deal. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1846, or Lincoln was elected in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Yeah, whatever. Doesn't seem like a big deal. Hold on here, my scrolling thing jumped a mile. So apparently Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Now it's starting to get a little weirder, right? Would you agree?
Yeah.
Definitely weird. Okay. So hang on. You got to be patient with me. So apparently Lincoln gave Black Americans, of course, freedom and legalized equality. And Kennedy, of course, enforced equality for Black Americans. So that's, still kind of interesting, but not that weird. War was thrust upon Kennedy almost immediately after he was inaugurated, and war was thrust upon Lincoln, same way. So they both had the same situation when they took office. Okay, Lincoln was succeeded after his assassination by Vice President Johnson. So was Kennedy after he was assassinated. It's interesting, very interesting. Andrew Johnson was, of course, Lincoln's successor, and he was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson was born in 1908, so exactly 100 years apart. Andrew Johnson's name is 13 letters. Lyndon Johnson's name is 13 letters. So when you start taking all these in collective, it does start getting a little odd. Lincoln's wife held his head in her lap after he was shot. Kennedy's wife, sadly, held his head in her lap after he was shot. Lincoln was shot on Friday. Kennedy was shot on Friday. Lincoln was shot. This gets really weird. Lincoln was shot in a theater named Ford. Kennedy was shot in a car built by Ford, which was a Lincoln. Think about it. And the car name was Lincoln.
And the Lincoln.
Yeah, it was a Lincoln convertible. Yeah. I remember that because I was actually watching that parade on TV live, or had caught the news coverage immediately afterwards, when I was little. So that really sticks in my head. Okay, Lincoln's assassin had a 3-word name, John Wilkes Booth. Kennedy's assassin had a 3-word name, Lee Harvey Oswald. John Wilkes Booth, 15 letters. Lee Harvey Oswald, 15 letters. These are just kind of like, Lincoln and Kennedy died in places beginning with the initials P and H. Lincoln died at the Peterson House. Kennedy died at Parkland Hospital. Somebody's really digging deep. In fact, there was about, I'm sure 30 things I took out of here because I thought they were a stretch. So I just took them out. I was going to take that one out, but I didn't. Booth was shot and killed in police custody. So the person who assassinated Lincoln was in police custody and was still shot before going to trial. And Oswald was shot and killed while he was in police custody before going to trial also. Let's see here. Let's skip that one. Let's skip that one. Skip that one. Okay. Kennedy's father had been an ambassador to England at the court of St. James. Lincoln's son became the ambassador to England at the court of St. James. Lincoln and Kennedy were considered 2 of the greatest presidents of all time, and they were obviously amazing. Lincoln loved great literature and could recite poetry by heart. Kennedy loved great literature and could recite poetry by heart. Those are things that you're kind of like, I could have thrown that out. Lincoln had 2 sons named Robert and Edward. Edward died young and Robert lived on. Kennedy had 2 brothers named Robert and Edward. And Robert died young and Edward lived on. Kennedy's seat in the Lincoln he was sitting in when he was shot is now in the Ford Museum. Lincoln's seat in the Ford that he was, Lincoln's, okay, this is confusing. Lincoln's seat in the Ford Theater he was sitting in when he was shot is also in the Ford Museum. So both these seats ended up somehow in this museum. Okay. A week before Lincoln was shot, he lived in, this is the crazy one. The last one, I don't want to bore anybody, but this one definitely needs a drum roll. You got to listen carefully. A week before Lincoln was shot, he was in Monroe, Maryland. A week before Kennedy was shot, he was in Maryland, Monroe. That's a bad joke. It's a bad joke, but true. A week before Lincoln was shot, he was in Monroe, Maryland, and a week before Kennedy was shot, he was in Maryland, Monroe. I thought that was in bad taste, but it was just too witty. I had to put it in there. Okay. So last week, I don't know if you listened to it, but I did a thing just on deer, just deer. We have deer everywhere. And I just spouted a whole bunch of weird facts on deer and trivia. And it prompted a reaction from one of our listeners who wrote me. His name is Tim. Anyhow, he wrote me a stranger than fiction story about what happened, I believe, to his mother. Could be his grandmother, but I believe it was his mother. So his mom lives in a beach community in southern Delaware. There's plenty of farmland and the deer population is abundant for the size of the state. This took place maybe 7 or 8 years ago. She lives in a bottom floor condo. So think about this. She's in this bottom floor condo across the street from a community pond. He says, Mom is sitting in her recliner watching TV, which also has a view of her front door, approximately 25 feet away. Her storm door was glossed with glass, so it was very glossy. There was no screen. So her primary door was open, the wooden door that's in front of your screen door, Alex, that we all have. The security door was open. So without any warning, she hears a giant crash, looks up, and there's a deer climbing over her in the chair. So she's in this condo, and suddenly she's got a deer on top of her.
On top of her.
And didn't notice the deer. So anyhow, I gotta find my place. So this event was over in seconds. You know, the door was open, so the deer ran out. I think 2 deer came in. They both ran out, not breaking the glass door knock. They just knocked out the glass. One proceeded to climb over Mom, jumped behind the chair, and both ran back out of the house. Thank God. The event took seconds. Mom was left, he says, with a bruised chest and a busted lip. They knocked, the deer knocked some furniture over, and her little dog hid under the bed for a couple hours, but nothing in the house was broken. So apparently Tim's sister called him from the hospital to explain what happened. Of course, that, you know, Tim thought his mom had lost her marbles. They evaluated her, everything was fine. You know, they got her ready to leave. And then people started singing, "Grandma got run over by a reindeer." So anyhow, so they teased her. Anyhow, and of course, they went, being an investigator, apparently that Tim's mom is, and didn't have any proof of this incident, went over and photographed some muddy prints of deer in the house. So there you go. It's hilarious. True story. Okay, so because those deer facts were so popular, I thought we would talk about another really super common animal, see if we can find some weird facts about raccoons. And if people have no idea how many raccoons live around every house in America, if you've got trees or oak trees or cripe anything other than pine trees, you're going to have raccoons. And you're going to be pestered by them, you're going to see them, you're going to spot them. You probably might even encounter a rabid raccoon, which I will tell a story of a baby rat or a rabid raccoon that when you were young, Alex, came out into the front yard. It's the craziest story ever. I mean, it's right out of The Walking Dead. Okay, so let me get to this raccoon stuff. Let's go here. Okay, so the population of raccoons, I tried forever to find how many raccoons live in the U.S. Could not find it. Does not exist. All they know is it's lots. And I'd venture to guess it's 100 million, 200 million raccoons live in America. It's insane. And the reason I know this, I used to go, I did it twice. I regret both times I did it, but I went raccoon hunting because there were some guys at work that had coon dogs and they kept bugging me to go with them. So I went with them once. And I've got a story about that too. But anyhow, I mean, there was no shortage of raccoons, I can tell you. And we were in like suburban neighborhoods. It was insane what they showed me, how many raccoons are around people's houses. Okay, so the raccoon does have a life expectancy of only 2 to 3 years, but in captivity, it can live 20 years, which is amazing. The average raccoon weighs 15 pounds, Alex. 15 pounds. Yeah, that's pretty big, actually. I mean, that's substantial. I think a raccoon at 15 pounds gets a hold of you, it could damage you. Raccoons are active primarily at night. And they're often, obviously spotted rummaging through trash, hence the new slang name, trash panda. And I think you called them, I mentioned raccoons, and you said, oh, you called them garbage pandas. Yeah. Well, okay, well, we'll stick with trash panda. So raccoons breed when the temp is cold. They don't like to breed when it's warm. Yep, that makes sense. And so raccoons like to invade attics, crawl spaces, decks, and so on. Like under your deck. I have a deck like that. I was worried there's going to be a raccoon that's going to get me from under the deck. But the problem is you get raccoons in your attic. They love chewing the wires. And they've burned down many homes, have burned down because of raccoons. And so maybe somebody be listening and go, I'm going to check my attic for raccoon feces and stuff. Okay. Okay, aside from their excellent sense of touch, because they actually have 5 fingers. Their hands look very much like human hands. Touch and a sense of smell. Raccoons have very sensitive hearing. A raccoon's hearing is so sharp that it can detect even movement of earthworms underground, which is amazing. Raccoon mothers are regularly observed teaching important survival skills to their young, unlike other animals who usually abandon their kids. They have great night vision. They have that mirror behind their eye membranes. And it says here their senses are extremely powerful, but they are not known for the great sense of sight. However, raccoons do have good night vision. Similar to cats, they have a reflective layer in the lens of the eyes called the tapetum lucidum, which enhances their vision of nearby objects. It said they don't have a wide vision range, so their depth perception is very limited.
Limited, yeah.
And they're colorblind, which I found interesting. Let's see here. So they can't distinguish colors. Male raccoons have bones in their penises.
Bones in their penises.
I thought you would like that, yeah. And that's referred to as a baculum.
Baculum.
Yeah, bears have that too. Just so you know, just throwing it out there, just so you can just throw that out at a cocktail party. Did you know? Okay. So one thing that's happened, and it mentioned that raccoons kind of now live and reside in our cities. They don't live, in the forested areas as much anymore. They've kind of moved to the cities. They've adapted to all of our garbage, hence the name Trash Pandas. It says raccoons are smarter than dogs, and this I did not know. Raccoons rank just below monkeys, which I thought really interesting. Let's see, they're able to remember specific and complicated tasks for years. So if you go out and teach a raccoon a trick, it'll know it for many years. Okay, among all of their senses, the most developed and the most significant sensory faculty of raccoons is their touch. They're very tactile. Since they mostly process their surroundings through touch, raccoons have whiskers near the tips of their paws. So they actually have whiskers by their paws.
By their paws.
Yeah, so that's a weird fact. You're never going to forget that fact, Alex. It's a very, very useful bit of trivia. Raccoons can make over 200 different complex vocal sounds. They use 200. 200, yeah, and they communicate with these different sounds, including chittering, purring, hissing, growling, which I've heard, screeching, and much more. Baby raccoon sounds even include meowing and crying, including whining sounds. So, anyhow. Raccoons are known to be wild animals and may become aggressive if they feel threatened. And I've, witnessed that numerous times in my life, camping and so on, trying to shoo a hungry raccoon out of camp. They're known to bite and scratch and transmit dangerous diseases like rabies, salmonella, and some other ones I don't even want to try to pronounce, including roundworm. Let's see here. I'm trying to hurry. There's no raccoons in Alaska. Who would have thought?
None in Alaska.
None.
Not one.
Not one. Apparently, there was once a presidential raccoon, since we were talking about presidents, and there was one that lived in the White House. And I'll get to that. Okay, so apparently raccoons are obviously hunted for their fur. I personally don't know anybody that's ever eaten one. But so somebody brought a live raccoon in 1926 to Calvin Coolidge. And so he received this live raccoon. He was supposed to eat it, right? And he was supposed to eat it on Thanksgiving, but he didn't. Instead, they raised it and they adopted it. And apparently it hung around the White House. Its name was Rebecca. And even for Christmas, it received an embroidered collar with the words White House Raccoon. Weird.
White House Raccoon.
Anyhow. And that's enough of that. Baby raccoons are referred to as a kit. A lot of people know that. A baby raccoon or a kit is born blind and deaf. After about 2 months of pregnancy, a female raccoon gives birth to a litter of 1 to 7 of these kits. Hence why there's so many of these darn things. Female raccoons are called sows. Males are called boars. So maybe they're related to bears. The rarest raccoon is the pygmy raccoon. It's only 250 individuals.
250.
Yep, so many. Naturally, raccoons live in the forest near water to support their diet of crayfish, crabs, and everything. Woodland forests with lakes and rivers obviously served years ago as ideal habitat before the introduction of humans. So raccoons wash their food. You've probably seen videos of that.
Yeah.
They're always dipping their food in water before they eat it. So let's see here. Don't befriend a pet raccoon. Jim, who works with us, used to have a pet raccoon.
He did.
Did you ever go see it?
No, I never did. Did you?
Really?
Did you see it?
No, I didn't want to. I had no interest. None. Okay. I think that's about... Oh, here's a worthless one. It was hilarious. Raccoons are common at the Kennedy Space Center. And I thought, God, that's a worthless fact.
Yeah.
I threw that in there just for you, Alex.
Bonus round.
Yep. Oh, hold on. Our guest is actually trying to get a hold of me. Interesting. Hang on here. I'll have to take a break and call him back. Okay, so what happened with my raccoon story? So when you were young, we came home and you were in the car, and there was a raccoon in the daytime running around kind of in circles and acting a little odd. So I called the sheriff's department and I said, get this raccoon, he's probably got distemper or rabies. Can I dispatch him, with my 22? And they said, yeah, it shouldn't be any problem, go whatever. Then they called back right away and said, no, don't dispatch it. We have an officer, in the area. We'll just send him out and he'll take care of it. I thought, great, perfect. Yeah, I don't want to deal with this. So this nice guy comes out and he goes up to the raccoon and he empties 6 rounds into this thing of probably a 45. And it just keeps coming at him. I mean, it's trying to attack him. And I saw him, he hit this thing 6 times. And so it's getting a little morbid. And then he loads another clip in, hits it another, shoots it again. And it just keeps coming at him. So then he starts shooting it in the head. And this thing has got barely, this is gross, but it's barely got anything left of its head. It's still trying to get him. So now he goes into the trunk and he grabs a tire iron and he starts just wailing on this poor thing. He's wailing on it. And I'm watching this going, what the? Thank God I didn't shoot it with my little 22. And what does he do? He puts the tire iron back. And I said, man, that was insane. He goes, yeah, you're not kidding. That was my 3rd one like that today. And that's when it went. That's when it went, whoa. That's scary.
Creepy.
Yeah, they're like, so when they get rabies, they get really crazed out. It's like Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, or the
Terminator.
Walking
Dead. The Terminator.
You can't be stopped.
Just absolutely nuts. So, trying to think here. Where are we at with time?
We got a
1 minute. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me at least text Peter back. See what's going on. I'll do this live. It'll be cool. Or I'll just call him. Lord knows this is our maiden show, right? Peter, did you get our invite? Oh yeah, that's where I sent it. Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Peter. So Peter is coming. So somebody wrote, I haven't even looked at the chat. I'm not used to it. Raccoon and bear family are closely related but different. The red panda are actually in the raccoon family. Yeah, that's interesting. I had heard that. The actual closest relative to a black bear is a chipmunk, Alex, which is weird. They're extremely close and genetically, yeah, extremely. So I think we got Peter in the wings here at this point.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give you a little background on Peter. So Peter Robbins is an investigative writer. He's an amazing author, lecturer. And when I say he's a lecturer, the topics this guy lectures on are insane. He's also, obviously a researcher who's focused on the topic of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications for humanity. He has appeared as a guest and a consultant on numerous radio shows, television programs, documentaries. He is also the host of his own live weekly 2-hour radio talk show called Meanwhile Here on Earth. So it's called Meanwhile Here on Earth is this podcast. So don't anybody leave now and go run over to Peter's podcast. Don't do that. And this podcast is found on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Robbins has spoken at many conferences in Washington, D.C., Virginia, at the UFO Reykjavik Summit, and at the International UFO Congress in Phoenix, Arizona, Laughlin, Nevada, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. He's emceed and spoken at the annual MUFON International Symposium and numerous MUFON state and regional affiliates. He lectures all over the country on an array of amazing UFO topics. And I would like to note that Peter also worked for Bud Hopkins. He worked with Bud Hopkins as his executive assistant. I don't really know. He can explain it. And Bud Hopkins was very famous for his work with UFO abductions and certainly a pioneer in that field. So his long list of professional credits include editorial assistant on the United Nations Secretary General's report for the establishment of a UN UFO department. Mr. Robbins was a founding member of the Bud Hopkins Intruders Foundation, a member of its advisory board, and was executive assistant to Mr. Hopkins. So without further ado, let's welcome Peter Robbins. Peter.
Welcome, Peter.
Hi, guys. There? Hey, how are you?
Good to be on.
Yeah, we just read a little bit of your bio. It is amazing to study it. It really is just amazing.
So where do we begin?
Oh my God. Let's do this. I want to hear about, because you witnessed this, and I'll never get another chance to ask this question. Before Bud passed away in 2011, where did he stand on the UFO alien abduction topic? Was he 100% convinced that, there were people being abducted by aliens?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I can say that fairly based on 35 years of friendship and colleagueship, about half of which time I worked for him as his assistant,
Okay.
starting as his studio assistant before he published any of his books, both of us having gotten interested in the subject at about the same time in the mid-'70s, and then his research assistant for many years after. And I can also add that, yes, I'm completely convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that what Bud and people like John Mack and Dr. David Jacobs and a pantheon of serious investigative researchers in various fields, that this is not a presenting sign for some psychological aberration combined with sleep paralysis and a bad movie that you saw that you thought really happened in blah, blah, blah. Yes, it
Right.
really happens. And that's a great deal for anybody to wrap their head around, especially if it's happening to you. But
Right.
I understand why it's such a challenging subject in the era of people getting more and more interested in UFOs. That's still, please give me a break. That can't be.
Right. Did you ever think that in 2022 that we'd be as far along as we are with the UFO topic and acceptance of everything from UFOs, alien abductions, or did you think we would be far further ahead? Or do you think it's about where you thought it would be?
When I first became involved in this field years ago, if you would have asked me if I thought, X amount of time in the future that we would be at this time, I guess I would have not known what to say. My anticipation was up. I thought sooner or later this is going to break. But after X number of years, you realize that maybe it's not. And you're just always going to be, working in outsider research, and you'll always be on the fringes, or the field that you work in will. Honestly, I didn't think this was going to happen, and certainly not quite like it did. And all of a sudden, the whole fear of ridicule that has kept so many people so relatively low key about this,
right,
since the inception in modern times in 1947, I don't think I thought it was going to happen quite this quick. And at the same time, I don't expect that our government officially, unless their hand is forced in ways that I guess we can only imagine, that they're going to willingly go through the process that's become described as disclosure per se, although I think the process is happening already right now.
Yeah. Do you think that there's going to be a lot more in the next year or so, or do you think we're kind of it for a while?
I think the sideshow, the amount of media babble and attention, serious and less than serious, is going to only amp up. There's no question that it's not going to drop off. This is happening, and it's a slow spiral now. I think that there will be events like we had last year, where a report came out of the Pentagon, a big deal was made of it. It did not amount to that much to folks in the know. But more important, it was an actual report, and with pressure for more knowledge, more information on this subject, coming from political elements on the left and right, which I think is very healthy. This is not a political issue per se, in that it doesn't matter whether you're a hardcore conservative or a liberal. It's unwinding slowly.
Yeah.
Whether or not we're just getting more stage managed information that the secret keepers already know, and just trying to drag your feet as the slow unwinding of information happens anyway, or whether or not there will be more actual information that is verifiable, that comes from absolutely credible sources, that there is evidence or proof of a certain level that it can be generally accepted, as opposed to just becoming another, conspiracy theory or claim, myth, legend, lore that is accepted as reality because people think it's cool, or, that's getting bored of the last one.
How many skeptics do you think are left out there? I mean, there can't be too many at this point. And if there are skeptics that still don't buy into it, why is that? I mean, how can somebody be that thick-headed?
I think first, we all have to be skeptics. Those of us especially who understand how serious this is and how real it is, all the more easy it is to, here's another case, and I guess it's real because other ones have been real, right, as opposed to starting again. What the problem is, in terms of human behavior, is debunkers. Skeptics, again, we should all be skeptics and do our best to establish beyond reasonable doubt, whatever that means to us, the reality of whatever we're looking at. But a debunker has the intellectual arrogance to tell the world that they know for a fact that what we're talking about here is not true. There are no truly anomalous UFOs from parts unknown, under intelligent control, or coming through some time warp or different dimension or Jacques Vallée hypothetical construct. It's just all nonsense. How do they know? Well, it just can't be. Therefore, it's my job to feed you some kind of pseudo-scientific explanation, or just put you down for, flying saucers and little green men and trot out the old-fashioned ridicule. That is, again, that's arrogant. And if one takes a look at it, yes, it may be a matter of what your anxiety level is, if this is real, as many of us maintain it is, as opposed to feeling the compulsion, the need, the understandable wanting to make somebody else wrong here. Because if you're right, and this happened to you, or you're right and your research has established beyond any doubt, reasonable doubt, that some UFO phenomena are indeed advanced craft from parts unknown coming and going under intelligent control, then everything I thought in my little world is now open to interpretation. Or what can I hold on to now? If this is true, what you're saying, it could have affected everything that I ever thought, knew, and I'd rather frankly call you a liar, or laugh at you, or dismiss what you're saying with some attitude or false excuse.
Well, one, I misspoke. What I meant was not skeptical, but somebody who's completely closed-minded, like you mentioned, a debunker, somebody who just will not accept there's no chance that we're being visited by anything other than just man-made objects or natural phenomena. And do you think a lot more people who were in that camp came over after the government announcements with the ATIP? Do you think it convinced a lot more? I mean, I would just love to get your handle on what percentages do you think came over to the right side?
That's a good question. And of course, we have no way of having statistics for that.
Right.
But since late 2017, when the way that this subject is put forward by major media, by government officials, elected and appointed, by popular culture at large, more and more, is more respectful, more grounded in sober appraisal than, goofball, fringe kind of thinking. I think that everybody is going to deal with this in some permutation of a different way. That for some people, just realizing this has changed and the tone and tenor of the time and the subject is different, the part of them that always felt something like this might be possible. But of course, I'm not going to talk about it because I know that's one of those just socially understood subjects that's code for, I'm a bit weird and you're going to feel uncomfortable around me. And, I believe in visits from flying saucers, and you're categorized, etc. I think they're going to feel more comfortable with it. I think people that already were comfortable with the subject but outspoken, well, some of them probably feel understandably a bit smug because they are right and other people weren't on a certain level. I think for the great majority of people out there, this is not a number one subject. It's just background noise at a different level. And it doesn't have to do with their being necessarily particularly skeptical or a debunker. They're just busy living their lives and have other priorities. I don't think there's anybody, well, realistically, it's hard to imagine somebody at some point, usually in their young life at some time, looking up into a clear night sky and wondering what's going on out there, if anything. And if there's stuff going on, what is it and who are you? And, that basic form of wonder that we share with people probably well before the dawn of language, maybe even some animals too. Or as I recently, in a meme, it was suggested that the stars are actually little holes in the lid of the jar so that we can breathe.
Oh man.
But who's
So
to say?
the weird thing about me, I don't really have a perspective because from the time I can remember, I always believed. I never even questioned it, just accepted it. And I always wonder, why am I that way? And why are other people so, there's no such thing, can't be, never could be. They won't even think about it. And I don't know how you were. Maybe you can kind of give us a background of you and how you grew up. And did you have any weird experiences that got you into this field?
Well, first I'll say it's easy to understand why this hits us differently. It's because we're all different people and we're brought up in different ways with different understandings of the way the world works. And maybe most important, we're brought up to feel secure, loved, encouraged to think our own thoughts, to explore our own situations, not be the prisoners of dogma or fear or guilt. And you grow up with, usually referred to as an open mind. Not that you can't have an open mind if you've had, a terrible childhood or something. But I think some people are just more tightly wound. And again, for some people, especially, not even especially, people of faith who in some cases feel that the historic reality of these other intelligences. And let me just clarify here that when we talk about, I use the term other intelligences because I've never felt particularly comfortable with the word alien. But, everybody has their own way of expressing it, that I'm specifically speaking not about some of other things that UFO phenomena may be. In this case, I'm talking about a civilization, a race of beings, whatever, who are the ones involved, in this case, with taking and returning human beings in what we call the UFO abduction phenomena, and that they are machines of extraordinary advanced technology. I think it's fair to say. That's what I'm talking about here in terms of truly anomalous UFOs. And again, I've just wandered completely off the question that you asked me that I was wandering in the field of the answer of. Can you remind me?
Oh, I'm just wondering, did anything happen to you
Oh, yeah.
at a young age? Yeah.
Yeah. My sister Helen and I, when we were kids, born in New York City, but came of age out on Long Island in a small village 30 miles or so east of Manhattan. And I grew up with, I would say, pretty zero interest in this subject. It was a very different time, more innocent. I had the sophistication of a Leave It to Beaver kind of character. And my interests, they were other boy interests, model planes and collecting stamps and bugs and woodscraft and reading and singing and that. The only aspect of the UFO subject, as we'll call it, that had any interest to me was the wonderful B movies when I was a kid that you could still see in theaters, and how usually on a Saturday I would go with some friends and watch, space aliens come here and try to destroy the earth or take people's brains or whatever, occasionally a not so threatening one. But I knew, in quotes, that was entertainment, that was fun, that was, story. And late one morning, my sister and I happened to be out in front of the house when 5 silvery white disc-shaped objects, absolutely in a precise V formation came out of I caught him out of my right peripheral vision first and stopped over the neighbor's house. And there was no ambiguity about this. They were silvery. They had detailing around the edge that when we talked about this a long time after, we both agreed could only be like looking at windows on a commercial airplane. And they were ellipses, like holding a dinner plate, at an angle, and they just hung there. And you can bet I had the reaction of my life, which was essentially running through everything in my mind that I knew they were not, and then realizing that they were something completely other, and that every adult bit of suggested knowledge in my life told me indirectly that they weren't real, but yet here they were.
Yeah.
And it was so shocking to me and so difficult for me to accept that I didn't accept it. And within a matter of probably a few short weeks, I had talked myself out of it and forgotten about it. And it became certainly a repressed memory, but as far as I know, the repressed memory of childhood. And it was more than 14 years before it really opened up again. And my life changed in a matter of minutes, really, because Helen, my sister, remembered it as well. And when I called her to ask her that right after this return memory, she made it clear that we shared this memory. I was very thankful that I didn't just blurt it out and basically set the scene so that she had to tell me what she remembered, not just say yes or no when I told her what I remembered. And then she said, but there's more, and told me something I had never heard about or never heard or heard reference to that I was aware of, although I may have somewhere along the line heard about the Betty and Barney Hill famous, the only known one in the media abduction case at that time in the 60s. But she told me about memories she had about being taken. And I listened as she talked about them. I've heard them, many similar memories related by many other people over the decades, often in almost the exact same words as my sister's experience. And my life changed not the day it happened, although I certainly remember that day now. It changed 14 years later, plus, when that memory returned and my career basically derailed because I became so obsessed with this subject, and then kind of tamed the obsession, but never walked away from it and continue to do the work.
So did you did Bud hypnotize you?
Oh, well, first, I didn't know Bud at this time. I didn't know there was anything called ufology. I didn't know there were people that did this work, or UFO conferences or UFO magazines, or, it was completely unknown to me. I knew nobody. There was no internet. I had never read a UFO book. I was an artist. I was a painter. That was my life in New York City. And this really destabilized it. I had to find myself a therapist who would help me, who took the subject seriously, and help me understand that I wasn't crazy, nor my sister, but that these things really happened, that he had two events in his life. But he helped me to normalize it at a time now nobody would even think about it. It's, so what? You saw a UFO, somebody who was abducted by aliens, so what? That's so everyday now. UFOs, yeah, I'm really shocked. This was not the way it was then.
So did Bud ever end up hypnotizing
Oh, yes.
you
First,
later on?
I met Bud about a year later, and it was still about 5 years before he published his first UFO book. So our friendship began almost at the same time that our major interest in this subject began. And a lot of that shared interest the first few years was about UFOs, but just as much, at least, and straight through, about the great city that we lived in, the art world, different artists, what was showing at the museums, art history, architecture, great novels. And then in 1981, he published a book that was a real game changer called Missing Time, which was the first kind of coordinated scientific study of people who claim to have had this abduction experience and associated missing time. In fact, the title of that book, I guess, had the very rare honor of being taken into the English language, per se. It's like when Colin Andrews created the term crop circle. That changes the language. I
Yeah.
always love the fact that William Shakespeare created, out of his imagination, 15 or 1800 new words. He
Wow.
just made them up and put them in context in his writings and performed the plays, and people got them and started to use them. I'm off on a tangent here, but missing time as a phrase, most people know that it's associated with UFOs or the paranormal or something strange,
Right.
and not whatever, missing time. I don't know. You watch stop or what,
Super interesting. So,
But yes, Bud did, after he was trained to do it. He hypnotized my sister, and then at another time hypnotized me.
okay.
And I, over the years, either at Bud's request or somebody he was working with's request, I sat in on and witnessed many hypnotic regressions of folks who seem to have had these experiences and for their own reasons wanted to go back and face them, explore them, remember more, make their peace with, however you want to see it. And I will also say that this is not necessarily always a part of, working with somebody on this subject. Hypnotic regression is a tool that is available to explore any number of things in this world.
Super interesting. So, you worked for Bud for 35 years. How many different abductees did you end up meeting during that time?
Well,
Was it in the hundreds or just?
we were friends for 35 years. I worked on and off for about half that time
Wow.
in a more or less official capacity. But yeah, certainly a couple of hundred.
Wow.
I think overall, Bud met with, spent time with, interviewed, sometimes did hypnotic regressions with, met with the families of, etc., over 800 people in his professional
Wow.
life
Wow.
that felt with or felt or claimed or did, in fact, have these experiences. And I'm sure with him alone, yeah, probably several hundred. And in the intervening years and even the years before, certainly other ones. I don't know what the statistic is on people who have been taken, but I would bet hard cash it's a larger percentage than most people are comfortable even considering, myself included.
What's that number? What's the number, Peter?
I have no idea,
None.
but
Okay.
I'd bet that most people alive know at least one person this has happened to,
Okay.
and whether that person, has shared that with them is, that's up to that person.
Right. Yeah. What would be some of the signs that people would have, if they've been abducted? What would be some of the telltale signs? Because one would think there would be just tons of people that would never want to admit it to themselves, even though they've had all these weird occurrences.
Well, you're absolutely right. And some of the most memorable people I worked with over the years with Bud and on my own, but thinking now especially of some whose stories Bud explored in depth, and a number of whom became books or papers or articles, that we're talking about common sense would suggest that if this is a reality, and I maintain it certainly is, and that if it's possible for it to happen to somebody, um, there's no way you want it to be you. And if in certain indications, memories, um, physical evidences, people who said, but I saw you, being floated through the window of your house and up into a craft, etc., that they would much rather, and dramatically so in a number of instances I'm aware of, and even was there, um, to have the researcher, the investigator, the mental health professional, um, whomever it is that they're working with to establish the reality or lack of same about this, that they would much prefer learning that instead they had some kind of psychological problem. They had some kind of mental illness or condition that absolutely had convinced them that this had happened. And, even like in a paranormal way, like certain very religious people in certain parts of the world around Easter, the signs of the stigmata open up, they just do and bleed. And that somehow you created this in your mind because it's, the nature of the mysteries of the mind. But I remember several people who really were in tears or near tears when they found out, as well as they could, that this was not something they could get a med for, and that, or go into therapy about, and that the condition would clear up that made you think this had happened. But what to look for? There were actually quite a number of indicators. There are quite a number of indicators. And over the years, Bud and close colleagues were able to observe and compare and agree on quite a lot of them. And for that reason, they never were printed out and handed out to the world per se.
Okay.
There's enough fakery going on in the world, but I'll give you a bunch of examples. And let me first say, when I was a kid, there were still what we called public service announcements on television. This was the old days, and it would be some message about savings bonds or brushing your teeth or being a good citizen. It's aimed at, kids in a more innocent time. And there was one I remember, the 7 deadly signs of cancer, a sore throat that will not go away, a sore that will not heal. And I remember sitting there going, I'm 7 years old or whatever, I've got cancer. Whatever that is, I know it's terrible. The indicators that you may have been taken, it's a lot of factors, other than if it's been multiply witnessed. First, this reality seems to run in family bloodlines, which when people first started really studying this in the 70s, that seemed the most unlikely thing. It's more thought that it was a random thing where if you had been abducted or alleged to have been abducted, or somebody saw you be abducted or whatever, it'd be like being hit by lightning. The odds are that if it ever happened, it would only happen, in the rarest incidences, and then not again. And that's not the way it is. People who are taken, these histories start usually by the time they're about a year old. It's not always the case, but that's the way it tends to start. And there may be associated memories of crib visitations where, you're in your crib and you have a memory that can be discernible of, a small being that isn't human. If in some family histories, a child, you're on a big picnic or something like that, and child disappears, an hour, 2 hours, has to be very frightening, and they're found. But they're further away than you can kind of figure out how they got there. And they've got like some little perfect cut or scar that they didn't have that you notice when you give them a bath that night. And sometimes it almost looks like a tiny ice cream scoop mark, but it's already cauterized, it's already healed. That you have very real memories, or memories of things that make no sense and they're like super real dreams, but you can't absolutely place them, of 4-foot white owls. Well, there are no 4-foot white owls,
Yeah.
but something, what we would call a screen memory, or a displacement of sorts. If you're looking at something that's so shocking to you, that your mind kindly sees something somewhat different. At the same time, we know as well as we can that they can affect our perception. A implant, a small foreign object, size of a grain of rice or a BB, that shows up in an X-ray or a CAT scan in a place sometimes where, how the hell did that get there? Never with any indication of surgery, even the finest kind of line, and in a number of places, or a parent that has confided to you that what has happened to you happened to them. And in cases, and I've seen them, the same scar in the same place on a mother and daughter, that kind of thing.
Okay.
A burn mark in the backyard associated with a memory of neighbors saying, we saw this light go down in your backyard, and that was when all the power went out to the neighborhood. There is proof. There is physiological changes to organic material, photographic evidence that can be established, because it's so easy in such a golden age of fabricating still images and moving images. But yeah, there are indicators, and more often than not, it is just a confluence of them, unless this is something that for some people, like my sister, conscious memory is never obliterated in part. You just remember it like you remember any other things that you remember in your normal, for lack of a better term, life.
What about bruising and scratching? I mean, is there anything that really would signify you need to probably talk to somebody? Or if somebody thinks they're being abducted, is it just fine to just hold it in and not talk to anybody, not seek help?
Well, no bruising and scratching that I can think of per se, but again, actual marks on the body.
Right.
In some cases, a pressure mark where you were held, but more often than not, the classical physical indications are a scar that was not there immediately preceding, but is already in scar formation, so to say. Again, the ubiquitous scoop mark.
Yeah.
A implant that is picked up way up in the nasal cavity, or subcutaneously in the hand, or in the back of the knee, or in the brain, or in the arm. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's a confluence of very real evidence, and some people simply are aware of it, and in a certain amount of very understandable denial, or, okay, if this is real, it's real, and what can I do about it? So far, so good. I'm still here. I'm still following my dreams. Every once in a while, I am taken. And I know if I talk about this to people, I'm going to sound nuts. And, I would like to have a life. Or I'm so thankful there is somebody I can confide this to. I have quietly read, what I consider serious research and accounts of this. I see myself in these accounts. Do I need to do anything about it? No, not right yet. Do I need to relive this if it's true? No, not necessarily. Or yes, I definitely have to find out. I must know. Everybody deals with it differently.
Yeah.
And in the case of Bud Hopkins, and for me, the most responsible people in the work, you don't tell them what they should do per se. You if they're interested in exploring it more and you are well trained, well credentialed, uh, a responsible practitioner of a skill like regressive hypnosis, um, put the interests of the individual before your own, um, and assist them to either recover a memory or make peace with a memory or re-explore a memory. That is between the two of you. But in many cases, talk is what it's all about.
Yeah.
And there are UFO abductee related support groups, as there are support groups for any number of subjects. To the best of my knowledge, Bud started the very first one and was, in terms of his character and his priorities and his sensitivity, intelligence, he was a natural to lead a support group. You don't have to be a mental health professional. Sometimes it helps, but I had the honor of attending almost all of them because I was his assistant and I needed to spend time with these people. And also my sister was in the first one. And people were able to assist each other just by that simple process of, my God, this happened to you too? And you remember this aspect and this part of it and this, and that can be immeasurably helpful in getting through any, traumatic situation. And for many people, this is traumatic. Other people, it's very beatific and expansive and positive. We're dealing with the unknown here, and different intelligences, perhaps with different motivations in their interfacing with us.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a big question. Are we being visited by hundreds of different species? Are we being visited by 2 or 3? I always wonder that.
Well, that's a great question, Doug.
Yeah.
And there are people in the work who will give you the numbers. And personally, they drive me crazy because my feeling is, even if through some combination of, you are the most amazing, deep within the American national security organizations and intelligence community, ranking generals in the Army, you're psychically connected to the supreme leaders of 6 alien races, and you're going to tell the world that there are 34 different civilizations visiting. Yeah, right. Give me a break. These numbers, I don't care whether you say it was channeled from the Akashic record or, this person or it came to you in a dream, or you can't tell me how because it would compromise my safety, one of my favorites. If people start offering you numbers, well, who knew? With all that said, who am I to say? I have no idea. But I know I have no idea where other people are saying it's 57, it's 34, it's 7.
Right.
These are the kind of people, for me, who, even if it's true, and let's take a kind of an existential moment here, it just makes the research community sound even goofier that we're going to take somebody's word for this. You're going to say that there are 57, and there are several well-known and by many people well-respected personalities in the field who pull stuff like this. For me, that's where everything veers off into the kind of thing that gives serious UFO studies a bad name, and rightly so.
Yeah. Well, it's stories like the Pascagoula incident, where they reported these aliens, they look like turnips. They're so bizarre, but there's never been another case, or maybe not many, where they, had what happened to them and what they saw. And so it's like, was that a one-off? They just came in.
I'm very familiar with the Pascagoula case.
That's amazing.
I considered Charlie a good friend, and Calvin has become a friend over the years.
Oh, okay.
I walked that walk with Charlie Hickson years ago in Mississippi in the late 80s. And once again, we're dealing with the unknown here. We can play games in a way and say, well, there's never been another report of ones quite like that. Therefore, I'm dismissing this one because,
Well, for me, it was the opposite.
well, what I'm saying is we're spinning our own wheels. And maybe there have been other incidences of visitations with these beings,
Right.
but unrecorded, or maybe they just decided, let's blank with these people today. And instead of looking like the normal grays that we are, let's generate this image with the pointy thing. And, let's see how it resonates
Sure.
in their popular culture. I mean, for me, it's why not? That's as logical as that they exist on a certain level.
You're
There
right.
are quite a handful of one-off cases in that sense of, whoa, you don't look like the beings that we've documented. I'm sorry. That that extra long triple nose has got to go.
I actually look,
These
but I,
are
but
these
but
are
I,
good questions, but they're rhetorical questions, and there's no
right,
way that anybody can give us an absolute answer. We can
right,
use our good common sense, our critical thinking, and just be as logical as we can. But
right.
it's the kind of thing when I do a show like yours, and I'm introduced as an expert on UFOs, and the first thing I have to do is make it clear that I am uncomfortable with that, because for me, it's just a silly thing to call somebody you're an expert on the unknown, which is a little
Yeah,
silly.
yeah, yeah.
I understand what people say, and I think it's more a respectful thing than not. But I'm this is a serious student of, even an authority is pushing the envelope a lot. Um, I know more than most people, but I know enough to know how little I really know, and could prove beyond a reasonable doubt, in some cosmic court of law.
Yeah. Did you notice, and I hate to say, I don't want to scare our audience, but obviously I would imagine some of the people that came to Bud had experienced a ton of pain, some extreme trauma. Like you listen to the Barney Hill under his regression. I mean, that's just horrible to listen to. That's quite hard. I mean, he was really afraid, and he
He was
really was in
terrified.
pain. Yeah, in
He was
pain.
terrified.
Yeah,
I have heard them, and they move me tremendously.
yeah.
Betty and Barney's niece, Kathy Martin, is a very dear friend and a close colleague. In fact, I was with her just a couple of weeks ago, and her husband in Florida. Um, and she has kind of walked me through the locations that we visited together in New England, that were part of her life as a kid, and Betty and Barney. But I'm getting off subject here. Yes, for many people, this has been a frightening, traumatic thing. I understand that a lot more focused research in the last decade or so, and I'm not fully sure what this indicates, but that there are significantly more people reporting positive, pleasurable, knowledge expanding, um, growth oriented contact experiences. And it is what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think, some people, that age old question about the aliens. And if we're just going to go by the way Hollywood does it, I think we have a confluence of opinion. Are they good or are they bad? Are they ET or are they Mars attacks? Well, maybe this is the wrong question to ask. Um, I don't, it's hard for me to imagine them, or one group of them, seeing themselves as, villains, in quotes, coming down here to torture us little human beings, and, frighten us like insects, or, you know, um, just screw around with us at that level, as opposed to they're doing what they're doing for a reason. I
Right.
think this abduction phenomena thing is not random in a sense, but they have their reasons for doing it. And yes, if we experience it as shocking, upsetting, traumatic, terrifying, well, that's not surprising. If we're another kind of person and maybe particularly open-minded, and this has happened to us, and we know we lived through it, and we had maybe some momentary discomfort or pain or real pain or terror, but it was because we were frightened and we didn't understand that they wanted to. Well, that's a whole nother level of the question here. Many people have sworn to the fact that, and I have no reason to doubt them, that they have heard in their head any number of things, in terms of telepathic communications when facing off with these other intelligences, and that they know that they are loved, and that, they want humanity to really everything to work out fine. But it's not that I'm an untrusting person. In fact, I'm probably too trusting a person in some respects, but I don't know why we should simply assume that they're any more faithful to telling the truth or lying than we human beings are. Deception seems to be a real part of the abduction phenomena in overt and covert ways. And the famous X-Files poster guides so much of everything that we're talking about here in a way. We all want to believe. We all want to believe something about these things. We want to believe that they are like ET, or we want to believe that they are not like Mars attacks, or if they are, that they're at least funny as they kill us all off. And that I want to believe this right now, that is having a lot more to do with than what may be, as opposed to what the media is doing to feed us what they feel will sell more commercial time and get more people to subscribe to their 24-hour news stations, or is so many more questions than answers around this subject.
Right.
And the extra time that I've spent in it only makes me more sure that I really don't know exactly what is going on behind the puppetry. And I guess that is one of the things that will always keep this very interesting to me. At any given time, I can tell you what I think I know, but unlike some of my colleagues, I am not always sure.
Yeah, one would think it would be very similar to when we go out and we collar a moose. We'll put a radio collar on a moose. We have to tranquilize it, sedate it. They take blood. They do this. They do that. They're not trying to hurt the moose, but they're a bit indifferent. They do care about the moose, but they want to get data. And I was out fishing with Alex's brother, and he was asking me that same question. Do you think aliens are, they're mean, or they're this? And I said, well, it's probably like this. And I was unhooking a fish off my barbless hook and releasing it back into the water. It's kind of like, well, there it is. We had our moment together, and the fish swims away,
Yeah.
Just indifferent. And have you kind of come to that conclusion?
Doug, I think that's very well said. The way I sometimes think about it for years is a best case scenario. Some of these other intelligences, they see what's coming at us in terms of environmental changes, challenges to survival of species, the health of this planet that we have done so much to demean. They see this clearer than we do. Let's just say that a group in question, or groups in question, have a pre-existing relationship with this planet that may go back even before us.
Yeah.
Or that we are in some way special to them, where somebody's graduate experiment, that we are to them what certain basic forms of life are to us, as we splice genes or do things that were just fantasy, a scientific generation ago, and that they are concerned. And if all fails, they lose something, we lose something, or we lose everything. The realities of contact are so sweeping. I just don't even know how we're going to make that jump once either our back is to the wall and something is going to happen that will change things overnight. Let's say that they or some group of them say enough already, for millennia, but in earnest for X number of decades, we have been showing up. We have been meeting with you. We have been taking you. We have been showing ourselves to you. And overall, you're still not getting it. And we need to move on. Time is a wasting right here. We need to work together, or things are going to go south very quickly.
Do you ever fantasize about that, Peter?
Oh, sure.
Having the sky filled with UFOs over the whole world.
My favorite fantasy about how it might go if they decide time for disclosure has to do with a mini series from the 80s that was remade maybe 10 years ago, simply with more money, but just as cheesy, called V. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
It was a couple of episodes, and this basic scenario is aliens come to Earth, and we are led to believe that it's like the famous Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man. They're here to help us with everything, but in fact, it's not going to work out that way. They're bad, and it quickly becomes every World War II resistance movie I've ever seen, except the bad aliens are the Nazis, and the old Jewish people in Florida who saw this coming, they're the underground. However, this silly series, both the one from the 80s and the remake, began with one of the best science fiction beginnings that, it's right up there for me with Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. One morning, everybody in the world wakes up and, choose the number. Over the 80 biggest cities in the world, 1 mile up is a mothership, a round, mile across, giant monster flying saucer. Game over. I thought that was brilliant. You have a literary device there, or again, if they've been willing to be this patient and create, how can I say, I think just by the fact that they have come and gone so many hundreds of thousands of times in all these locations over all these years, all around the planet, repeatedly, that we're looking to create perhaps a tipping point where at a certain point, enough people in the general population will have either seen truly anomalous UFOs, enough to really be life-changing, interfaced with beings, seen enough credible evidence to have their mind open so that they could be like people we know, or to a degree ourselves, and say, yes, I take this seriously. And if it all blows up, I won't be surprised. I will know that it might have happened and now it is happening. That we are still quite a distance, I think, from that critical balancing point. And I don't mean in the world of people like you and me and who are watching your show. I mean all the people that they know that's their friend who's into UFOs. And they seem so interesting and normal otherwise. Although now that's changing. As we know, the last few years have changed dramatically in terms of the dissipation of the ridicule factor, which is a very healthy trend.
Okay, I've got a question for you. Is there Is there an abduction case that really haunts you, Peter? You know, to where you can't get it out of your head, or it bugs you, or it keeps you up at night? Is there one case that nobody knows about that maybe you do?
Mhm.
You don't have to give any names or
That's a
anything.
great question. I'll put it this way. It's not so much that there's one case that haunts me, it's that there's lots of parts of different cases that
Mm,
haunt me. And just in this moment, I thought of one completely unique in my experience in another part of the country. I am invited to meet with somebody who has had abduction experiences their whole life. They live in a fairly rural area. They are an electrician. They are married to a practical nurse. They have a house that is so built on common sense. There's nothing showy.
yeah.
Um, the appliances, would be in a past time Sears, um, tools by craftsmen, everything just so utilitarian. But he has been taken on and off for his whole life.
Yeah.
His wife knows this because she lives with him. They live in a house, again, in a rural farming area, and behind them is a huge field and then a forest. And the relationship between the field and the forest and the house and UFO visitations has been quite dramatic. A, a colleague had told me about this man and an incident that he had and that he was public about, but that even for people in abduction research, this was one for the books. And did I want to meet him? And I said, after he told me, I did. And I went, and nicest people in the world, very low key, extremely modest. At the same time, knowing that this was a secret life that he was living, he was not an out abductee, except with a select group of researchers in his area that knew him and did not, violate that privacy.
Mhm.
And what had happened on this particular abduction experience was he was sleeping on his stomach. And as is often the case, when if you're part of a couple, or it could be siblings or best friends or lovers, one person is taken historically and the other one is not. They are turned off or put to sleep, or the sleep that they're in is enhanced or what have you. But,
Okay.
and he started to have an experience. Um, his wife lay asleep on the bed and he started to rise off the bed and toward the ceiling. And this had happened many times where he would ultimately pass through the ceiling. Folks, I don't know how it happens, but those molecules do it. And then the roof, and then into the craft, and that night would begin. And and I'm just relating this, as he is starting to come to the ceiling, and then that process is beginning where part of him is already in the ceiling. Let's say, you know, part of his shoulder and part of his back is maybe half an inch sharing the plasterboard of the ceiling. Something happens. Something technologically goes wrong. I mean, I don't know how to say it except that
Mm.
maybe somebody accidentally hit a switch. It wouldn't be that mechanical, but something happened and the process stopped and he fell. Gravity took over again. And when he fell, part of him was in the ceiling
Oh gosh.
and small part of the ceiling came out and he came down, thankfully, where he had been picked up next to his wife, hit that, mattress very hard. Thankfully, he didn't break his nose or anything. They both woke up very quickly. And
Jeez.
he has this weird pair of like tear injuries in his muscle in his upper back. His wife is a nurse. but this needs more than, home care. And they have to go to the ER and invent some cockamamie thing to tell the doctors there.
Oh my gosh.
They get away with it on a certain level. It's, the middle of the night in a rural area. But I remember sitting in his home and knowing that I was there because he understood the importance of what had happened. He understood its significance to somebody like me. And without being prurient or creepy, or in any way inappropriate, it was like, if you want to take a look at this, of course you can, because, you're a serious researcher. It's not like some freak show or something. Now, I know Bud and Dave had both been up to visit him, and I discussed it with them. I know several other very close, respected colleagues that had also visited the house. And when he asked me if, should I take off my shirt? Would you like to see it? And I remember thinking to myself, what am I going to see? I'm going to see some scar tissue that I'll wire up with what he's just told me. Do I need to put him through this again? And I realized, no, I didn't need to see it. But I thanked him. But that sticks in my mind. And it's a reminder that we are dealing with other intelligences. And again, in the area that we've been discussing, Doug, of truly anomalous UFOs, because most, if not the great majority, of reports of UFOs are explainable in conventional terms, even if they're, so to say, exotic conventional terms. And I think about sometimes, wonder if he still has experiences.
Yeah.
There are so many people, and they are everybody you know. They are every background, race, socioeconomic, predisposition, political thinking, career-wise, talent or lack of same. They're just a reflection of the general population. And again, I will say to your viewers, the chances are much better than not that you know at least one person that has been through this. And if they don't want you to know, you don't know. And if they have shared it with you, consider it a privilege and maintain that confidence. But know that they're that close. This is real. It happens. And why it's going on, I don't know for sure. But it's not random. There is a method to what is going on here, and is part of a program that at least one of these groups is involved in, an area of study that maybe at a certain point will come to an end. But this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, Dr. Jacobs is pretty convinced that it's just for breeding at this point.
Yeah,
like it's changed.
Well, that we're talking about that we haven't brought up till this time, so-called hybrids.
Yeah.
Beings that are part us and part them. And why are such beings being brought into existence? Again, we can only make educated guesses here, although some people will tell you they know for a fact why it is. Well, they may be right, but I don't know that. I don't know why. But I'll make a couple of educated guesses. One is certainly that they may be aware that the rate of toxification, the rate of species becoming extinct, the rate of pollution, the rate of the rise of the ocean, all may be accelerating more than we know, we think we know, we're being told, whatever. And not even thinking about this in terms of 50 or 100 years from now, but 500 or 5,000 or 50,000 years from now, I don't know.
Right.
But perhaps it's an effort to try to create a being that has got the best aspects of us and them to acclimatize better as we move forward, or something completely else that may be more nefarious or more beatific.
Yeah.
again, we all want to believe something. And I think in that push, and combined with the anxiety of what's going on here, what is this all about? That some people have a tendency, almost like a religion. I just need something to believe in, and I hope it's what I want it to be. You know, they're here to be our saviors. They're here to help us clean up the mess that we started, and to help us with population control and food production and nuclear waste, and you know, they're like this longed for new pantheon of high-tech gods because we've made a mess of things. um, Maybe there's some truth to that, or that again it's something completely other. But you know, I remember the lyrics to a wonderful old Bob Dylan song, something is happening and you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? But because so many people
Perfect.
know now that something is happening, they want to have some kind of belief system attached to it. And
Right.
they are not comfortable with the Peter Robbins philosophy is, I've been doing this for decades and I'm not sure what's going on. That's not okay with me. You know, I need to know what's going on. I'm going to find another researcher. Thank you. Keep up your good work.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. So, I mean, it is, I guess, where I'm at, and I'm not a researcher, but I'm in a thirst. I have a thirst for knowledge. I could talk to you, Peter, for 20 hours and just take a little pee break here and there. I would never get tired of it. Just to even discuss the topic with somebody is so exciting. And read everything I can read, and I just take it in. I don't know. It almost makes me happy when I'm reading about UFOs and UFO related incidents, and it just does something. It's like a hunger. And are you kind of that way still? Because you've been
No,
doing this longer than I have. That's for
I'm
sure.
actually not that way still, although I'm on part that way. I began again obsessed with the subject
Yeah.
and reading everything I could find, and then more. There weren't a lot of options. There was no internet to go to, of course. And point by point, I learned about organizations and publications, people in my area who I was starting to realize weren't insane. I knew that I wasn't crazy, nor my sister, but I figured any other adult that takes this seriously has to be nuts. I edged my way into it over time, and then became more and more involved because I felt it was terribly important, and I still do.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main reason I stay in it. It's not because I love it. I would much
Well,
rather be working where I used to work in off-Broadway theater, or having followed my career as a painter. But I'm not saying this hasn't been satisfying or fascinating or given me an opportunity to meet incredibly memorable people who I would have never met otherwise, and in many cases, to visit places that I would have never had a chance to see otherwise. It's it's a terrible way to make a living. It's not a smart way to earn your living, but at the same time, it can be incredibly satisfying. And for me, more than a preoccupation with them at this point, Doug, is a preoccupation with us, because that's an area that I feel I can make some impact on. And it's one of the reasons why it kind of made sense 2 years ago or so when I was asked if I wanted to have a radio show and do a live broadcast
yeah.
once a week for 2 hours, which is a lot of time, as you know, to hold. And you know, if your guest starts to drift or something, you know, you got some time to fill. But after working as a researcher and an investigator and a writer and an editor and uh, an archivist and an author, it seemed, and a consultant, to be the most natural thing to go into broadcasting and to try to connect with as many people as I can on this, because ultimately that is the most powerful thing about what we're talking about. We will or we won't find out some of the answers to the hard questions we have been putting forward in this conversation before we die. But what we can do is do our best to keep helping each other to educate each other and to keep the actuality of disclosure moving. It's one of the reasons why, even though it's been virtual for the last couple of years, I still prioritize giving talks to large or small groups. I'm very pleased that I'm finally going to be getting up and around and out again to speak live here and abroad this coming year. That for me, if we can get to the point as human beings where we all, or generally all of us, take seriously that we are not alone, that we have a lot more in common with each other, even the each others that we have the least in common with, than we have with them.
Yeah.
Whatever they are, whatever they represent, whatever they may be in terms of supportive or aggressive, nice or nasty as far as our attitudes go, that we need to get ourselves together, actually and allegorically. And accepting this reality is a big part of growing up a little bit as a race, a civilization, a collective of consciousnesses. We can't keep playing this game of the big lie and the national security state, the lie at the center of everything from the end of World War II is we're not alone. And that this is covered up first by the American government and more or less by different governments, although other governments, some of them are very forthcoming and much healthier in their attitude with their populations.
Do you think, Peter, that there's a few people in our government, and I do mean a very small amount, that know not everything, but they know, where they come from, what they want, what they're doing? Do you know what I mean? Do you think there's just a few?
That's a great question. I'd like to think there are.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that there are individuals who are the inheritors of bodies of knowledge that have been researched by various departments and offices, sometimes in coordination, sometimes separate from each other. And over the last few decades, multinational corporate entities and military industrial complex folks. We're dealing with powers that are not necessarily elected anymore, and intelligence communities that are only partly official. This is some dark doings here. I am confident that there are people highly placed in government and in the multinational government corporate intelligence cabal, so to say, who have substantial knowledge on the reality of some of these other intelligences and of their technology and possibly of their motivations and the whys of as well as the hows.
Peter. Yeah, so I was going to ask, do you think that any government, any multinational corporation, do you think that any of them are in direct contact with any, UFO intelligence?
Important question, Alex. Years ago, I would have said no. That's the kind of silly sensationalism and, faux science fiction. Give me a break. That's just going in the wrong direction here. You're asking me now? Very possible. I don't know, but I'm certainly open to that as a reality. Why not? We only need one human being and one very official human being and one other intelligence to make that contact and have it protected, to have the answer to your question be a yes. It may be true now. It may be true for on and off for 75 years or longer, or millennia, in fact. I would just be irresponsible for me to say, yes or no. I can say I think so or I don't think so. Personal opinion, I'm damned if I know. I really wish I did know. Great question.
So one of the things that makes me think about Alex's question is I happen to have a friend. I was visiting out west, and he said, "Hey, do you want to have dinner with the guy who was in charge of Cheyenne Mountain?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so anyhow, we went out to dinner, and I asked him one of the first questions I asked him. I said, "So, are there any UFOs?" And his answer was, "There are no UFOs." And he answered it very.
Good for him.
And I went, "Okay, enough said." And then he went on to explain what they can see with their satellites and how clear.
Sure.
And, you know, when he was telling me all this stuff, and this is back in the 90s when I had dinner with this guy, and I didn't want to give his name because he was a major person in the military. And, but he did answer it and kept his oath. He just said there are no UFOs.
I think that's a very elegant answer. In other
Was.
words, we know
What they are.
Well,
He
at
meant
least
what
the
he
basic,
meant.
yeah,
At least we can see them.
yeah. Or that, yes, the kind of UFO you're talking about, yes, it's a metal machine of advanced technology
Yeah.
coming from somewhere. So there's no you. It's a flying object, and when you're cleared to know, we'll tell you more.
Yeah, exactly. Alex, you must have some more questions. I've hogged Peter.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna ask. It's kind of building off of that, you know. What do you think the main motivation is to, not have more disclosure with the public? Do you think it's the government is afraid that people are going to break down and there's going to be, panic?
Again, I'm just making educated guesses here. I think those are possible reasons. I think also there's what I'd call the original sin of this lie of nothing to see here, folks. It's all explainable in other terms. Flying saucers and little green men, very, a nice idea, but no, it's not that. Trust us. We're the United States government and the Air Force. I think there is what we call hubris, a great deal of weight on the alpha males that are the keepers of the secret, and certainly those who were the originators of the secret in 1947. I think it's important to remember that back then, the world was a different place. All of a sudden, they have the remains of a crash of a craft that we know isn't ours, that we know is from elsewhere. And how do we begin to tell the American people, and by extension, the world, that this is real? Well, we can't. We just aren't able to, so we don't. So we make up excuses. And to your question, though, if it were possible, and I think at this point, official disclosure would have to come collectively, no one world leader. And even just saying that, maybe Putin or the Chinese president at some point will say, screw the Americans. We're just going to drop the bomb here and show proof, show crash UFOs, show bodies, and let the chips fall where they may. No American president can go before the public and say, my fellow Americans, it's my solemn duty to let you know that 1947 we learned such and such. We have not been forthcoming with you since then. We want to clean it up now. UFOs are real. Some of them are machines from other places. We're not alone. And welcome to the brave new world. It would mean that the current president or the past president or the next president would have to say, that means, or you have to understand, or I hope you don't think that the very first president to deal with this, Harry Truman, and every president since him, has been an unindicted co-conspirator in the biggest cover-up in history. And presidents are touchy about that. Politicians are touchy about that. Parties are touchy about that. To admit the lie that was set in motion. And, they can say, well, a Democrat set it in motion. Yeah, but a Republican who was just as knowledgeable didn't do anything about it after him and just keep passing along the blame. I think that fear of the War of the Worlds broadcast from 1938 and people just losing their minds in, a panic. That's a little naive. I think we're probably more together than that. That people of faith will be challenged and, their belief in God will be challenged. I doubt it. I think it'll be just the opposite. I think faith will be deepened when disclosure is revealed. However, when it's understood that these things are running on power sources that could change our world in the best ways, but at the same time, throw the petrochemical industry, the nuclear industry, alternate power into a panic. Because, well, maybe not, alternate basic, solar and wind power, that kind of thing. But these huge multi-squadrillion dollar industries that are based on technologies that are old hat compared to what these things have to offer us. And just that, again, the fear of the unknown. Better the devil that we know than, the devil that we don't know. It's so difficult, I think, for the people who hold those secrets to fully let them go and step out of the way.
Yeah, I certainly can sense there's something big probably going to happen at some point. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see it, but I really think that that's what's been motivating me to just get more knowledge. It's just this constant sense of something big, bigger than me, bigger than everything, so important to mankind. And that's just, that's why this topic is so darn amazing. One last question. James Colbert, if you can scroll up, or I can scroll up, he had asked about, have you ever heard of Area 53 and 54? And I'd never heard that before.
I've heard
there it is. Yep.
Yeah, other areas with such designations, but that's all. I've heard of them. It wouldn't surprise me if they exist under those names or other designations. I beyond that, I can't add anything.
Interesting. Well, maybe in the future we'll hear more about it. So, where can people buy your books and get a hold of you if they need to, and maybe you could tell us about your podcast again.
Yeah, I have written and published 3 books. They're all out of print, unfortunately, because my co-author on the first one and the other 2 were about the same subject, Great Britain's best-known UFO incident, the Rendlesham Forest UFO events of 1980, that my former co-author faked part of his account, stretched the truth quite a bit, forged things, and those books will never go into print again. I have a DVD out right now on the extraordinary life and suspicious death of James Forrestal. That's actually the name of the DVD. Our first Secretary of Defense, who history tells us committed suicide, but in fact was murdered. And I believe I can establish that beyond reasonable doubt in this DVD, which is available from On Wings Productions. That's ONWINGES. They have a website and you can find it there. Otherwise, you can follow me on Facebook or be my friend there. Follow me on Twitter. That's at Peter Robbins UFO. Or please listen or watch my weekly show, which is Meanwhile Here on Earth. It's on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. That's KGRADB.com, 7 to 9 Monday nights. And you can also find those shows on Spreaker and on the KGRA Digital Broadcasting website.
Peter, I could talk to you forever. You're so amazing and you're just so knowledgeable. And there's just something about you I've always admired. And I've never met you before, but I've watched a lot of your stuff, seen you throughout the years, and I've just always admired your style. You have style, sir. You're amazing.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do. And I'm glad to come back at some point.
Yeah,
and
we'd love to have
continue
you
our
back
chat.
on.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on.
Would love to have you on again.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. We're out of
Thank
time.
you.
And thank you for everybody that did tune in. This was our first YouTube show. And next Wednesday, I believe we'll be back on YouTube again. So hopefully the audience will build slow. And this will become a podcast and will be available in all the podcast formats, including Apple and Spotify and iHeart and everything. So good night, everybody.
Good night.